Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a civilization that should absolutely dominate at lower elo now that the new patch is upon us and infantry has been made viable again. Pretty much all of the infantry civs had a huge boost with the last patch, and a lot of them have been made way more viable. But there's one in particular that stands out because its infantry gameplay is super hard to face. Like, it's really hard for me as the top player to face, it's really hard for the mid elo players to face, but for the lower elos, I think it would be very difficult to face off against the civ. And the civ I'm talking about is the Romans. The Romans have been made incredibly strong on the new patch because they are an already decent and strong civilization, but have now been made way stronger because their infantry is back on the menu in a huge way. For context, I did give Romans A tier on my last tier list, which if you haven't watched, you should definitely check out. And I think they absolutely deserve that spot across all elos, but I think they actually go up to an S tier when we're talking about lower elo gameplay. And by low elo, I just mean an elo where players can't micro monks or CA or crossbows that efficiently, because those are the three units that counter men-at-arms and counter longsword play, in Castle Age. You can even argue that an elo where mangonel micro and like attack grounding with mangonels is not as proficient, because those are the tools that you're going to need to rely on to face up against the Roman composition. It's no longer enough to fight these guys head on because it's really difficult to actually outstat them in combat. Let me go through some of the strengths of the Romans to really show you guys why I think the civ is going to be really strong at lower elos, and it's actually something I'd recommend for beginners or even like lower elo players to pick up and try to climb some elo that try to get better using the infantry rush with the Romans, but also using some of their other options as well, because as I mentioned, they are not a one-trick pony. They're quite a solid civ overall. So even before the new patch, they were quite solid. They had a good eco bonus, they had men-at-arm with armor that was still quite scary, the cheap scorpions were always a really solid option, and they had strong late game compositions. Something like Halb Scorpion was really hard to face, Centurion plus Legionary was really strong, you always had Siege Ram as an option to lead into, so you had a lot of tools in the late game that were quite difficult to deal with. However, with the new patch, all of what I said above is true, but it just became way better. Like, they still have a really good eco bonus, the men-at-arm with armor are still incredibly scary, getting that double armor for the price of one and an age earlier is really solid. And now that men-at-arm move at the same speed as archers and skirms, it's now incredibly hard to deal with the men-at-arm in the feudal age. I think the answer is still going for archers and trying to like kite them away, but that just became way harder and you can't chase down the men-at-arms like you used to be able to do. So now the men-at-arms can actually run away from your archer defense, so while you can fend off the men-at-arm, the Roman player doesn't need to lose them at all. He can keep them alive and transition into a longswordsman play in Castle Age. So not only does the Roman player have more of a chance to pack a punch with the early men-at-arm rush, they're cheaper now, so he's going to save a little bit more resources, they move faster, so he's got more chances to kill villagers and to take good engagements against, whatever he's going to be facing. And then on top of that, you don't need to die to enemy archers. What a sweet deal that is for the Romans. And what makes this strategy really strong for lower levels, in my opinion, is that it's really easy to execute. You just open with a standard men-at-arm rush, and then instead of switching to a range and going for archers or skirms, which is a little bit more difficult to do, they just switch to a blacksmith and get infantry armor. It's a very simple process and leaves you with 3 men-at-arm that are super beefy and hard to deal with. And then as a follow-up, you can always just add in more men-at-arms and you're going to be overwhelming your opponent with +2 armor men-at-arms. They naturally have 1 pierce armor, so you go up to 3 pierce armor, meaning everything does 1 damage to you except the archer, which does 2 damage. The only thing arrow-wise that really is a threat are towers and town centers that are garrisoned. Those do quite a bit of damage, but everything else, including the archer at 2 damage, is really quite negligible. I still think though overall that archers are still the best way to deal with this rush, as I mentioned earlier, because everything else doesn't really work either. If you go your own men-at-arms, you're just getting outstatted, you're not really accomplishing much. If you go for scouts, the Roman player can easily mix in a spear, and let me tell you, a spear with 2 extra armor is literally impossible to kill for scouts. Like, it's so difficult to deal with that. So then you're dealing with men-at-arms and spears, and your scouts will just not stand a chance against that. So basically what you're left with is a really solid and easy opening for the Roman player to do that's incredibly hard to deal with. And the best part is, even if you do deal with the men-at-arms and you take like very little damage in feudal, the Roman player has a really good economy behind it, so he can easily transition into Castle Age. He can decide how many men-at-arms he wants to commit to in feudal and keep you on the edge of your toes the whole time, and then come Castle Age, he can follow it up with longswords. But now you no longer have the option to defend with archers, and not archers alone at least, because the Roman player will easily mix in scorpions and maybe some rams for a deadly push, and this is where things really get complicated. So in feudal age, I wouldn't say that it's like that much of a threat. I think it's solid, it's really strong, but I can imagine lower level players dealing with it pretty consistently, especially when you factor in that half the time the Roman player will run his meta arm into the town center. Yes, the TC magnet is real. It drags the meta arms from anywhere on the map straight into the enemy town center, and you always lose them. So considering the meta arm magnets, the town center, and considering the fact that, you know, archers can be viable and defense with walls could be, you know, possible, it now takes us to the long swords in castle with the scorpion and ram follow-up. That's where things really get difficult for the defending player, because he no longer can rely on only archers, which is why I mentioned at the start of the video that monks and mangonels will play a huge part in defending this Roman rush. Because for example, if I was getting rushed by Roman scorpions and longswords, it would be scary, but I'd be able to defend it with crossbows, monks, and mangonels. That's my go-to comp. I wouldn't go for knights for the same reason that I wouldn't go for scouts in the early game in feudal age, because then the Roman player can just mix in pikes and we're back to square one. It's going to be even harder to defend, and everything I've sunk into knights is going to be pretty much useless besides a little bit of raiding that I might be able to get. So I'm going to be defending with range units, monks, and mangonels. And for me, I can attack ground with the mangonel, I can convert perfectly with the monks and then get out of way, I can kite with the archers and avoid the scorpion shots pretty easily. But for a beginner player, all of that is incredibly hard to do compared to what the Roman player has to do, which is just patrol his long swords and keep the scorpions right behind them, and then maybe a ram can hit the building to break in. That's basically the game plan. Now, it is worth mentioning that the ram will be kind of necessary to break in, because as a balance choice, the devs did take away arson from the Romans. This was a really good decision from the devs, because if not, then Roman men at arms with arson in feudal age would be really deadly, and then that arson carrying over to castle age would also be quite deadly and hard to deal with. So I thought it was a really good decision to remove arson from the Romans. But that being said, it's still not that big of a deal, because come castle age, a ram can come out and that can break the buildings just as easily as the arson longswords can. And let's be real, even without arson, I think infantry can still break buildings. It's just not as proficient, but it's still definitely possible and remains a threat. So overall, I think this Roman strategy is very, very strong at lower levels. It's much easier to do it rather than to defend against it, which is usually a good sign for the attacker. And it has a lot of factors really working in its favor. On top of that, Romans just being a good and flexible civ that can easily tech into cavalry and other options leaves you feeling that you're not a one-trick pony just because you're picking up the Romans. Even if you did a meta arm opening in 90% of your games, you'd still have to adapt after the opening based on what your opponent goes for, and you'd still have those 10% of games where you have to do something else because the meta arm opening might get a bit too predictable. I will talk about one of the downsides though of the Romans, but I think it's kind of a fake downside. People think that just because other champions got a buff and not necessarily the legionaries getting that same buff, it means that legionaries got worse. Technically, that is true, they are comparably worse now, but legionaries still win the fight against other champions. Like, champions is not a good option against the Romans. So I don't believe that Romans get weaker just because other civs champions got stronger. Let's be honest, if you have legionaries with a centurion giving them the aura buff and scorpions behind, if your opponent goes champions, he's basically handing you elo on a silver platter, and boy am I hungry to eat some of that elo. That will not be the case. If your opponent goes champion, he will get absolutely destroyed, and so I don't believe that this downside is actually real. It was worth addressing because people were thinking Romans got kind of scammed by the situation, but I really don't think it's a big deal, and I actually agree with the devs not buffing legionaries because they're already very strong. They do not need to get stronger, although they still do benefit from the movement speed increase. They just don't benefit from the other stuff that the champions got. So in conclusion, I highly recommend picking up Romans if you're a lower level player, or maybe even just a beginner player that happens to like infantry. I think it's a really good civ, and the only downside for you guys is that it is kind of hidden behind a paywall. It does come with a DLC, but if you guys own it, feel free to go for it. If you guys don't own the DLC, don't feel like it's a pay to win situation where you have to pick it up to be able to compete. Romans do have some counters. You can easily defend them by using, you know, proper anti-meta arm tactics, and then you can just figure out ways to deal with their castle age push, maybe drop a castle, maybe learn how to micro mangonels and monks. There are ways around this. It's not a pay to win situation, but I still felt it's a video worth making for those that have the Romans. I'm kind of putting them online for you guys and giving you guys the green light to start playing the civ, because I think it'll be a very fun civ to play, a very strong civ to play, and right now it's the perfect meta arm civ to really push at lower levels. And just for full transparency, on maps with shorefish in pro tournaments, Romans will absolutely dominate as well. So don't just think that this is only a low elo thing. It's a low elo thing in Arabia and like just standard maps, but on specific maps and tournaments where there is like infantry being meta, you guys are really close to each other, there's a lot of shorefish, there's a lot of reason to fight early game, Romans will absolutely dominate those maps. So it's still a threat for us pros in tournaments in the right situation. Alright, that's it for this video. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys want to get better at the game, I highly recommend you check out the Patreon, where I have my exclusive guides and color-coded PDF strategy guide, as well as some exclusive videos that don't make it to YouTube that are all about how to get better, how to play faster, quicker, and how to be a bit more strategic. All of my secrets are revealed there. And if you guys want to be part of the live stream, check out my Twitch channel. Both links to Twitch and Patreon are in the description below. And as always, I wish you all a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.